Hello, my name is Lisa Thibeau, and this is my final artifact project for class ECU 501, Research and Methodology. The research question that I will be looking at for this project is, will daily mindfulness activities decrease the number, intensity, and duration of externalizing behavior incidents of upper elementary school students with severe emotional behavioral disabilities? My hypothesis is daily mindfulness activities will decrease the number, intensity, and duration of externalizing behavior incidents. Why is this an important question for educators? According to Schonert, Rochelle, and Lawler, recent years have witnessed a growing portion of school-age children experiencing a large number of social, emotional, and behavioral problems that interfere with their interpersonal relationships, school success, and their potential to become competent adults and productive citizens of today's society. In today's world, mental health problems are on the rise, and approximately 1 in 5 children and adolescents experience problems severe enough to warrant a need for mental health services, but fewer than 15% of these people receive the help that they need. We are noticing with these mental health problems, there is severe behavioral reactions in response to them. Problems associated with mental health difficulties include peer relationship problems, school dropout rates, and significant disruption to the social and academic environment for these students, other students around them, and the community in which they are part of. This highlights the need for interventions targeting children's social and emotional skills early before mental health difficulties emerge. I believe that these early intervention programs would be most successful if implemented in a school-based setting. As stated in the Mind Up curriculum from 2011, social and emotional competence in children and adolescents can be fostered and their behavioral problems deterred via classroom and school-based intervention efforts. Schools are widely acknowledged as the major setting in which activities should be undertaken to promote students' competence and prevent the development of unhealthy behaviors. Schools provide access to all children on a regular and consistent basis over their formative years of development, which is why we should implement these strategies here. I believe that many of these programs that are being tried and implemented into classrooms focus mainly on one competency. So for example, conflict resolution, anger management, peer relationships, emotions. And I think we need to start taking a more comprehensive approach to promote a wider range of social and emotional skills and make these strategies and skills more personalized for each individual student. There is starting to be a shift in recent years from being preoccupied with repairing the problems more to the enhancement of positive qualities and preventing problems before they start to arise. Educational interventions can be designed to foster children's strength, resiliency, and regulation. And this is why I am looking at the intervention program using mindfulness activities, because I believe that mindfulness activities addresses all of the above mentioned facts. Mindfulness is starting to become more of a focus in today's education. However, being so new, there's a lack of research on it, and you're just starting to see a lot of the research emerging. So this is why I took it upon myself to try to do an action research project based on the mindfulness activities. Action research is the best research design for my study. Action research is designed to enhance and improve current practice within a specific classroom, school, or district. It is undertaken by practitioners who have identified problems they wish to solve or who would simply like to find ways to enhance their own teaching or student learning, or both. It is empowering and collaborative. It aims to improve educational practice, and it is undertaken to understand, evaluate, and change. The ultimate goal is to improve an educational practice. According to Sagar, this type of research helps educators to become more effective at what they care about most, their teaching and the development of their students. Seeing students grow is probably the greatest joy educators can experience. And this is why action research is the best for my study, because I want to see the growth in my students to be able to control their emotional self-regulation. I want to look at my teaching and my teaching practices to see how I can assist them with this to make this change. Sager compiled a list of common steps found in action research frameworks. The first step is selecting a focus. In my study, the focus will be on emotional outbursts and self-regulation of students with social, emotional, and behavioral disabilities. The second step is clarifying theories. We will examine the results of 2 previous studies done that were similar to the one that I am going to do. The third step is identifying the research question. In my study, we will look at, will daily mindfulness activities decrease the number, intensity, and duration of externalizing behavioral incidents? The collection of data will include observed behaviors in the classroom, data gathered through a questionnaire from parents and guardians in regards to behavior at home, and data from students through an interview in regards to how they feel about the mindfulness activities and their self-regulation strategies. For analyzing the data, we will look at and create graphs and charts. Reporting results and taking informed action, we will look at the results and the implications they will have on my educational practice and how they could possibly be generalized to other settings and lead to further research questions. For my study, we are looking more specifically at practical action research. According to Lodico, action research based on a pragmatic framework involves looking at issues or problems in one's own classroom, school, or educational setting to see how practice can be improved. We are looking at the 7 students in my class and the emotional outbursts that occur. We are looking at the decreasing of the number and intensity and duration of these outbursts, and also for a change in the ability for self-regulation of students when they are feeling upset or angry. Lodico states that there are common characteristics in any type of action research. For example, it's conducted in the practitioner researcher's own educational setting. We are looking at the 7 students in my Bridges program that all have been diagnosed with a social, emotional, and behavioral disability. The practitioner takes an active part in the research. I will be planning, implementing the mindfulness activities, as well as creating instruments used to collect the data. We'll be analyzing the data and also looking at the results to help further my practice. It involves collaboration. I am collaborating with my behavior support worker in order to gather data, and we are also working with the parents and guardians and the students themselves. Focuses on taking action to change and improve educational practices. We are looking at, with a change in the number, intensity, and duration of emotional outbursts and more effective self-regulation strategies, hopefully the students will be more successful in school, home, and also as members of society. Action research is ongoing and includes several waves of data collection, reflection, and action. Even though this is short in duration for 5 weeks, I would like to see these mindfulness activities continue in my classroom. For this study, we are looking at various ways of collecting data, which include both qualitative and quantitative. And we will reflect on the results and the implications these will have for my practice, and also looking at further research questions that it could lead to. In the next few slides, I wanted to go over a few definitions that we will see throughout my research project. The first one being mindfulness. Mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way. It's on purpose, in the present moment, and being non-judgmental. It is a way of being more deeply present in to your body, your thoughts, and to your emotions. Practicing mindfulness can lead to very deep levels of relaxation, calmness, and inner balance, as well as a greater sense of control and more effectively coping with stressful situations. Mindfulness helps us to get off what they call autopilot and reclaim how we respond to the unavoidable stressors in our lives that we have no control over. Here in Alberta, we have a special education coding criteria guide that is given to us by the government, and it defines a student and child with a severe emotional behavioral disorder as one who displays chronic, extreme, and pervasive behaviors that require close and constant adult supervision, requires high levels of structure and other intensive support services in order to function in an educational setting. The behaviors significantly interfere with both the learning and safety of the students and other students. The child could be dangerously aggressive and destructive to themselves and or others, violent and or extremely compulsive. Some of these diagnoses include conduct disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, severe chronic clinical depression, severe oppositional defiant disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and may display self-stimulation or self-injury behavior. As we will see later on, the 7 students in my class have all been diagnosed with a severe social emotional disability, and those students will be the participants of this study. Another term that we are going to be looking at is executive function. According to a group of researchers in 2010, executive function encompasses a host of interrelated yet somewhat independent processes involved in planning and carrying out regulated, goal-directed activity. Working memory, mental set shifting, and response inhibition are examples of core executive function that map onto dimensions of behavioral self-regulation. Poor executive function is associated with cognitive deficits, poor social emotional adjustment, and poor academic functioning, which may manifest as an inability to understand mental states and or impulsiveness. This is important for my study because these disruptions are associated with behavioral characteristics of several child-onset behavioral disorders. As I stated earlier, mindfulness intervention programs and activities are starting to emerge in school-based settings and into classrooms. There is some research, but still not a lot, and specifically not a lot, showing the effects of mindfulness interventions on social emotional competence of students. However, Schonert, Rochelle, and Lawler in 2010 did a quasi-experimental study evaluating the effectiveness of a mindfulness program that focuses on facilitating the development of social and emotional competence and positive emotions. The participants included 246 4th to 7th grade students. They were from regular public education classes from 12 elementary schools in a large urban school district in a Western Canadian city. 12 teachers participated. 6 were involved in a mindfulness training prior to the study being implemented, and 6 served as controls with no mindfulness training. However, the 6 that did not receive the training were offered the training after the study was complete. The instruments used in this study included a basic information form that students filled out. The students also filled out an optimism subscale from the resiliency inventory, and they filled this out pre and post mindfulness intervention. They also had to complete 2 8-item subscales from the self-description questionnaire and a positive and negative affect schedule, and these both looked at the self and school concept, and these were done pre and post mindfulness intervention. The teachers had to complete a rating scale of social competence for each student, and they did this pre and post mindfulness intervention. And the teachers also kept a program diary throughout the 10 weeks of mindfulness intervention, and in this they included what components they had completed that day and how that day went. The procedure, after getting permission from the university and from the school district, included the students filling out their questionnaires, and then there was 10 weeks of intervention of mindfulness activities, and these activities were 3 times a day. Some of them included activities like quieting the mind, mindful attention, managing negative emotions and negative thinking, acknowledgement of self and others, working on emotions. The teachers filled out the logs as they went along, and at the end of the 10 weeks, questionnaires were filled out by the students and teachers. The results provided encouraging evidence of positive effect on fostering students' social and emotional learning. The students exposed to the mindfulness program, in contrast to the controls, had greater optimism and self-school concepts. Major findings were in the attention and concentration dimension and social and emotional competence dimension. Students that participated in the program, compared to those that did not, evidenced significant improvements in their positive emotions. Teachers rated students that participated in the program had improved in social competent behavior. The evidence from this study was very promising. It showed the great positive effects that mindfulness programming can have on social and emotional competence of students. However, there is an absence of extended follow-up assessment from this study. The evidence was gathered and analyzed over a 10-week period, and it would be interesting to see if, in a year or two, these great positive effects continued for these students after this mindfulness programming intervention. This study included behavioral ratings rather than direct observations of student behavior, and this study was not a group of specific children with severe social emotional disabilities. So when I was looking at doing my action research, I tried to include some of these, which we will see in a little bit. Fluke and Smalley and other researchers in 2010 conducted a randomized controlled trial to investigate the introduction of a mindful awareness practice program over a short period of time. They wanted to evaluate its impact on executive function processes in students. They suggested that MAPS training would improve executive function in children with poorer executive function. The participants included 64 second and third grade students ages 7 to 9 years. They came from diverse ethnic backgrounds, and they attended an on-campus university school in Los Angeles. The instrument used in this study was a questionnaire that was completed by parents and teachers pre-MAPS training and post-MAPS training. The questionnaire was called the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Function, and the domains measured cognition, emotion, and behavior. Higher scores indicate more dysregulation in behaviors associated with executive function. The procedure started with a letter being sent home asking parent permission for students to participate. The parents and teachers then completed questionnaires prior to the MAPS training for those students that had permission to participate. The students were then randomly selected for a MAPS program group or the control group. While the MAPS program group was getting the mindfulness activities, the control group did silent reading. The MAPS training was 8 weeks in length, and the activities were done 2 times a week. Some of these activities included meditation, breathing activities, and activities for a weekly objective, including sensory awareness, peer relationships, and emotions. After the 8 weeks, the post-questionnaire was completed by the parent and teacher, and then data was analyzed. The teacher data showed children with poorer initial executive function that went through the MAPS training showed an improvement in executive function after the training compared to the control group. Parents reported more improvement in executive function for those children with initially poorer executive function who went through MAPS training as compared to the controls. Similar to the previous study, data shows that mindfulness activities can have a positive effect on executive function of students. This was recognized by teachers and parents in this study. However, research in this study was done with a general group, not a subgroup of students with executive function deficits, in particular social, emotional, and behavioral deficits. The study looked at teacher and parent data collection, but did not include the student perceptions of the program intervention, how they were feeling, or even what they felt about the activities. This study used the teacher rating scale rather than direct observation of student behaviors. These were some of the limitations of this study, but I have tried to address these in my action research study that we are about to see. We are now going to take a look at my action research project, and we were examining the question of will daily mindfulness activities decrease the number, intensity, and duration of externalizing behavior incidents of upper elementary school students with severe emotional behavioral disabilities. The participants in my study include the 7 students from a Bridges program that I teach in. They range from 9 to 12 years of age and grades 4 to 6. There are 2 girls and 5 boys in the class, and all students have been diagnosed with a severe social, emotional, behavioral disability. All my students have also been diagnosed with a mild cognitive disability, which means they are functioning 3 to 4 grades below their actual grade and have difficulty with processing. All of these diagnoses were done through a psychological assessment. All of these students come from diverse backgrounds and unique family and living situations. Most students have been through or are going through traumatic events. The next few slides show a brief summary profile for each of the students in my class. I have listed their name, which I have changed for the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy policy that we have at our school, even though each student does have permission from a parent or guardian to participate in the study, their age, their grade, and their diagnoses. Some of these diagnoses include conduct disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, fetal narcotic syndrome, and some other ones that are listed here. I have also included a section called background information just to give one an idea of some of the traumatic experiences that these children have gone through or are currently going through. Some of these include drug detoxing as an infant, major family issues, finding mom deceased because of a drug overdose, sexual abuse, and child family services involvement, as some of these students have been apprehended more than once. I have also included a section near the bottom of each profile to show some of the strengths and favorites for each student. The study will take place over 5 weeks. During weeks 1 and 2, we will gather data for pre-intervention of mindfulness activities. The teacher, myself, and my behavior support worker will complete behavioral incident charts for each student. With both of us doing this, this will allow for triangulation of data. We will also conduct student interviews, both of us again, for triangulation of data, and a parent letter and questionnaire will be sent home. During weeks 3 and 4 will be the implementation of daily mindfulness activities. We're going to do 3 activities per day, Monday through Friday. In the morning, we will focus on feelings and the 5 senses. After lunch, the activities will be focused on breathing and relaxation. And at the end of the day, the activities will focus on body awareness, and we will have a daily closure activity. During week 5, we will gather data for the post-intervention. Once again, myself and my behavior support worker will complete behavioral incident charts for each student. This will again allow for triangulation of data. We will conduct our final student interview, and we will send home our final parent questionnaire. Then we will analyze the data by comparing the pre and post-intervention behavioral incident charts for each student. We will compare the pre and post-intervention student interviews. We will compare pre and post-intervention parent questionnaires. And we will look to see if there is a correlation between mindfulness activities and externalizing behavioral incidents of students. To measure the dependent variable of externalizing behavior incidents of students, we will be using behavioral incident charts to gather quantitative data. We'll be using student interviews to gather qualitative data, and we'll be using a parent questionnaire which will gather both quantitative and qualitative data. The independent variable in our study is the intervention program with mindfulness activities. We will now go into more detail for each of these. After receiving approval from the school administration to engage in this study, we sent home an information letter about the study, as well as asking parents or guardians permission for their child to participate. Attached to this letter was a questionnaire that we asked parents and guardians to fill out and return by the end of week 1. This was the same questionnaire that was sent home in week 5 of the study after the mindfulness activities intervention. This slide shows the parent questionnaire that I created. The purpose of this questionnaire was to gain information from parents and guardians about what they observe at home in regards to their child's emotional outbursts. Part 1 looks at the number of incidents that they observe during the week, before and after school, and on the weekends. The choices were 0, 1, 2, 3, and more than 3. Part 2 looks at the intensity of the emotional outbursts observed. This looks at harming themselves and others, verbal outbursts, and unsafe behaviors. They used a rating scale of 1 to 5, 1 being none or never, and 5 being extreme and always. Part 3 looked at the duration of the emotional outbursts observed. We asked them to rate as an average or an estimated time in minutes, and A was less than a minute, B 1 to 5 minutes, C 6 to 10 minutes, D 11 to 15 minutes, and E more than 15 minutes. We also left a space if parents or guardians felt that they wanted to add any other comments to this questionnaire. This questionnaire was done in week 1, prior to the mindfulness activity intervention, and also in week 5 after the mindfulness activity intervention. The instrument used to record externalizing behavior incidents of students was a behavioral incident chart that I created. I created this chart about a year and a half ago, and we have been using it consistently ever since to record incidents that occur inside of the classroom, at recess, at lunch, after school, and even on the bus. The student name goes at the top and the date of the incident is underneath. Documented by would be myself or my behavior support worker. In the case of this study, we both recorded data for every incident that we observed from each student. The first box is for the antecedent, which is what led up to the behavior, which is documented in the box beside what we saw happening during the incident. Underneath, there is a space for duration of the incident in minutes, whether inappropriate verbal outbursts were observed, was there physical violence, unsafe behavior, and also a space to record any other data from the incident. This slide shows an example on the left of just a blank behavioral incident chart. The one in the middle is a sample of a student that I have recorded information for over incidents that we saw. And on the far right is the recorded data from my behavior support worker for the same student with the same incidents. My behavior support worker and I have been working together for a few years, and we have used the chart that I created for a year and a half. However, prior to the study, we both sat down to go over some of the explanations that we would need in order to fill out the chart appropriately. The antecedent is what event preceded the emotional outburst. The duration of the incident was about how many minutes from the start of the incident to when the child was in a calmer state. This did not necessarily mean that they were engaged back into the lesson or activity in the class. Inappropriate verbal outbursts included anything like yelling, swearing, threatening others, or using rude or offensive comments during an outburst. Physical violence included hurting or harming themselves or others, such as punching, hitting, spitting, pushing, banging their head, or fists. This also included slamming doors, throwing chairs, or throwing desks, or any other object for that matter. Unsafe behaviors included such things as leaving the class or the school without permission or hiding in the school somewhere. The students also participated in individual interviews that were done and recorded by myself and the behavior support worker. They were done individually and set in a separate room from the rest of the class. The questions asked were, number 1, do you feel like you get upset at school? You enter a red zone. Number 2, what do you do when you get angry? Entering a red zone. Number 3, what do you do to feel happy? To get back into your green zone. We used the red zone and green zone language because we have been doing the zones of regulation in our class, and we wanted to keep the terminology similar when they were talking about their emotions so that we could get the most accurate data for this study. The next few slides show the weekly plan that I created for the mindfulness activities intervention that we did in our class. We did these activities 3 times a day for a duration of 2 weeks. We would do these activities in the morning, after lunch, and at the end of the day, except for on Fridays we have early dismissal, so we did our last activity at 12:10 in the afternoon. The morning activities included working on emotions and how the students were feeling at that time, being able to recognize why they felt that way, and be able to talk about them. These activities were then followed by me reading a story, usually a picture book, and working with the skills of self confidence, self esteem, empathy, kindness, and generosity. And following the story, there was usually an activity based on those. After that, we engaged in snack time, which is when I supplied a snack for them, and we worked on being in the moment and using our mind in the moment to answer questions and really think about these questions as we were eating our snack. Some of the snacks included granola bars, oranges, cheese and crackers, a sandwich, etc. After lunch, when they came in from outside, the first thing we did was work on breathing and relaxation techniques and skills. We worked on various breathing games and activities online to work on the deep breathing and being in the moment. We also worked on learning some yoga activities and also doing some yoga videos online. We also looked at doing exercises which would increase our heart rate, and then learned about where we could find our pulse and feel our heart as we did deep breathing to bring that heart rate back down and really focus on how we were feeling in that moment. At the end of the day, we all gathered in our cozy corner as a group and engaged in body awareness activities. Some of these included where I would hit a pan and they would have to do deep breathing until they could no longer hear the sound. And we discussed it after, what it felt like, how long did it take, and just worked again on being in the moment with that sound. Another activity included me showing them a picture of a beach with blue water, white sand, a palm tree, and they had to think about what sounds they would hear if they were actually laying on the beach. How do they feel? And again, being in that moment. Another activity involved them having to visualize a happy place to them, and then we shared our happy places and what those happy places looked like and maybe sounded like, and how they felt when they were in these places, or if they could be in these places, because some of them were obviously made up. Another activity involved cutting out pictures from a magazine and making a collage with a partner of different emotions and different faces they could find in the magazine. After these activities were completed, we ended the day with once again a discussion on how the day went and how they felt that day. So we sort of wrapped it up again, discussing the feelings and being in that moment, and hopefully leaving feeling in a positive state of mind at the end of the day. This slide shows just a few resources that we used for some of the mindfulness activities. On the far left are two resources that I created, the top one being a feeling wheel where there are faces and then the word emotion on the bottom, where students were able to flip to the face of how they were feeling and show others in the class. And at the bottom is a feeling wheel where they were able to turn the arrow to the face that they were feeling. Some students were really great at discussing how they felt and why they felt, and others just used these visuals to flip to their emotion and show others. The middle picture shows glitter bottles that are similar to the ones that we made in class. Students were able to use food coloring to color the water any color they'd like, and then add glitter, and then we glued on the lids. Students would shake these up, and then we worked on deep breathing until all the glitter would settle into the bottom. And on the far right are just a few other resources that I did purchase to work on deep breathing activities and watching till all the bubbles went to the bottom or the top or the timer ran out. We are now going to take a look at the data collection and data analysis for this research project. The first one we're going to look at is the data collection for the behavioral incidents that occurred for each individual student the week prior to the mindfulness activities intervention and the week after these interventions were in place. So I created this chart just to summarize all of the data that was from the charts that my behavior support worker and I were filling out for each incident that occurred for each individual student. So these are just two examples. I did this for all 7 of the students, but these are 2 examples of what these charts looked like once the data was summarized. So the white column is the data collection for the pre-implementation of mindfulness activities. The yellow column shows the data collection post-implementation of mindfulness activities. So for example, for the student on the left, Tyler, on the Monday prior to the mindfulness activities intervention, the number of incidents were 5. Out of those 5, 3 had inappropriate verbal outbursts. 2 out of the 5 had physical violence. 0 had unsafe behaviors, and the average duration for each of these incidents was about 14 minutes. For the Monday after the mindfulness intervention activities where the data was collected, the number of incidents went down to 3. 2 out of 3 of those incidents had inappropriate verbal outbursts. 1 out of 3 had physical violence, 0 unsafe behaviors, and the average duration of each incident at that time was about 12 minutes. And we went through that, and then on the right hand of each of these charts is the total for each of those weeks. For the inappropriate verbal outbursts, the physical violence, and the unsafe behaviors, I also turned it into a percent just so it was easier to compare, and also put into a graph to visually see what the data collection looks like. Using the summarized data from the charts shown on the previous screen, I created a bar graph and a chart for each individual student. The bar graph shows in percentages the number of inappropriate verbal outbursts, physical violence, and unsafe behaviors seen in emotional outbursts, pre-implementation of mindfulness activities, and post-implementation of mindfulness activities. The chart underneath shows the number of incidents and average duration of incidents in minutes pre and post intervention. When looking at the charts, we can see that inappropriate verbal outbursts decreased for 3 out of 7 students. When looking at Nick, there was an increase in verbal outbursts. However, there was a large drop in physical violence, 14%. When looking at Skyla, there was an increase in verbal outbursts. However, physical violence and unsafe behavior went down to 0. For Jade, there was an increase in verbal outbursts, but physical violence decreased to 0. Dominic, an increase in verbal outbursts. However, physical violence went down to 0 and unsafe behavior dropped by 13%. So we can maybe gather from this information that some of the more severe reactions in their emotional outbursts were replaced with verbal outbursts. So they weren't running out of the room anymore, but maybe they were using inappropriate language. They weren't hitting others or hitting themselves or throwing things, and replacing that behavior with verbal outbursts. We would hope that if we continued with the mindfulness activities intervention, that maybe over a period of time we might see the number of verbal outbursts for those students decrease as well. For physical violence, all 7 students decreased. For unsafe behaviors, 5 out of 7 students showed a decrease. Curtis showed an increase in this, however, there was a huge drop in the number of incidents for him. And Jade showed an increase in unsafe behaviors, but again, her physical violence dropped to 0. So again, maybe with prolonged intervention strategies, we might continue to hopefully see these students decrease in that area as well. For all 7 students, the number of incidents decreased, and the duration of each of the incidents decreased as well. When looking at a total average of all students, it is observed that there was a decrease in all areas from pre-mindfulness activity intervention to post-mindfulness activities intervention. The next data collection we will look at is from the student interviews. From this data, we can see that most students had a more in-depth discussion in the post-interviews. For example, Dennis replied nothing and a shoulder shrug when asked, "Do you feel like you get upset at school?" in the pre-interview, 2 a few times, but not much in the post-interview. When Dominic was asked, "What do you do to feel happy to get back into your green zone?" in the pre-interview, he said nothing, and in the post-interview, he said practice deep breathing, listen to music, eat my snack, look at funny pictures to try to make me smile. We can also see that most students described less intense emotional outbursts in the post-interview. For example, Nick said when he got angry, he would run away in the pre-interview. In the post-interview, he was able to answer that question with his face gets red. Another example is Dominic. In the pre-interview, when he gets angry, he said he would push his chair over and tell people he would kill them. In the post-interview, he said he would try to make himself feel better, and he tells his teacher how he is feeling. Also, all students were described at least one personalized, controlled, and more acceptable way of getting back into his or her green zone. Some of these examples were students said that they would use their glitter bottle, they would count to 10, they would listen to music, they would talk about feelings, or they would eat a snack. And these activities were also examples of what we were doing and implemented during the mindfulness activities intervention in our class. Overall, we can see in the post-interviews that students were recognizing emotions more and mindfulness self-regulation strategies. They seemed more positive in the post-interviews than in the pre-interviews. The last data collection that we are going to look at is from the parent questionnaires. To compare the data from the pre-questionnaire and the post-questionnaire, I created 2 bar graphs and a chart for each student. The next few slides show this data collection. The first bar graph for each student shows the data collection for the number of behavioral outbursts that parents observed before and after school and on the weekends. The second bar graph for each student is the part 2 of the parent questionnaire, where they had to use the scale ratings and they were asked questions based on the intensity of each emotional outburst that they observed. And the chart at the bottom was the data collected from part 3, which was the duration of each of the emotional outbursts. The blue column for each bar graph was the pre-questionnaire, and the yellow shows the post-questionnaire results. Overall, parents noticed an improvement at home. There were no increases in areas. A few stayed the same, but they did not increase. On the questionnaire, there was also a part for parents or guardians to add comments, and I just wanted to mention a few of these. Some of these included, I noticed my child doing some deep breathing when he became upset with me. Jade taught me about listening to sounds around me and would always ask me what I hear when we were out shopping. Dennis showed me a breathing picture on the computer and we practiced it together for a few minutes. It was sort of neat. My kid asked me what I thought was the most important thing about me. It was a hard question to answer, but made me think. I noticed a huge difference in the mornings when Dominic was getting ready. No fights. It was actually nice. Between the post-questionnaire results and the comments made by parents and guardians, this demonstrated that students were starting to use the mindfulness strategies learned in class at home as well. Present findings from this study suggest that daily mindfulness activities can decrease the number, intensity, and duration of externalizing behavior incidents of upper elementary school students with severe emotional behavioral disabilities. From the data, one can see that there is a correlation between mindfulness activities and externalizing behavior incidents of students. From my study, there are implications for teachers and others in the educational field. Teacher, parents, and students in my studies reported changes which suggest that improvement in behavioral regulation can be generalized across various settings. The study demonstrated that daily mindfulness activities that are short in duration and easily implemented in classroom settings can have a profound impact on student success. It is important that we look at these intervention programs happening in school settings. Evidence supports that social emotional competence in children and adolescents can be fostered and their behavioral problems deterred via classroom and school based interventions. Elementary schools, in particular, are preferred institutions for primary prevention programs. Exploring ways to promote executive functions early in life has potential for a wide ranging impact on children's ongoing socio emotional development. Research suggests that accessing this open and receptive state of awareness can have beneficial health effects both physically and mentally. Another implication for educators from my study is that mindfulness intervention activities can foster resiliency and stave off an upward trajectory of aggressive behavior and mental health problems. It is important to continue these activities as proficiency is cultivated through repetition and continuous practice. The implementation of these daily mindfulness activities should be considered for all students, especially those with severe social emotional disabilities. At the end of the study, my students were more successful in self-regulation and demonstrated better control of their behavior. It helped them to become more aware of self-regulation strategies and how to use these mindfulness activities when feeling upset or angry. Hopefully, we can see that these strategies will help them become positive and effective contributing members of society. In summary, daily mindfulness activities can improve current classroom practices, especially in decreasing the number, intensity, and duration of externalizing incidents of students with severe social, emotional, behavioral disabilities. There were many positive outcomes from my study. However, I will address a few limitations. In my study, we did not have a control group as I determined it was unethical to deprive some students in the class from a possible effective intervention. The sample size was small as I only have 7 students in my class, and we only looked at the students in this Bridges program in my school. The whole study was short in duration as it only took place over 5 weeks. And it would be beneficial for an extended follow-up assessment. For example, if we continued this program, we would like to take a look at all these results again at the end of the year. And also with this Bridges program, we are able to teach these students for 2 to 3 years. So maybe looking at results over that extended period of time. When looking at the intervention program, we have to make sure that we would have teacher buy-in. Teachers have to read, research, and plan activities on their own. They have to be willing to personalize it for the students and their class, which takes time and effort. Because of the lack of professional development, teachers have to take it upon him or herself to find the activities and the programs that they would be implementing in their class. During the design and implementation of this action research project, there were some challenges that I came upon. The first was in the creation of the parent questionnaire. I wanted to create a general questionnaire to gather the information and data required for this study. I wanted to make sure it was not too time-consuming for the adults to complete and had to really think about the questions and the wording to make sure it was easily understood and simplified. Another challenge was in the planning of the mindfulness activities. At times, it was very time-consuming to plan and organize these on top of planning other subject material for the students. It was also challenging to create the chart to record the data required. I needed a chart that was easy to read but still include all the various aspects being studied. During the implementation of this study, data collection for observed behaviors could be challenging at times. We wanted to make sure that we recorded these outbursts as close to the time as it happened, but because of the complexities and needs of our students, at times that could be very difficult. Another challenge was getting the parent questionnaires back on time. However, with a few reminders and agendas and a couple phone calls home, we were able to get them all back. Another challenge was we only had limited time to implement the activities. There are so many activities that we could introduce, and we wanted to make sure there was repetition with these activities. However, in only a 2-week time period to look at these, it was quite challenging to do so. Another challenge was making sure that these activities were done at those times. For example, when students came in after lunch, sometimes we were trying to diffuse incidents that happened, so it was tricky to get into the breathing and the activity part of that lesson. So we had to wait for a few minutes to start those. Given the results of this study, there are a few further research questions that could be examined or studied. For example, would these results be observed or continue to improve at the end of the year if the activities were continued? With the continuation of these mindfulness activities in the class for 2 to 3 years, would one see these same improvements at that time? Would students continue to use these mindfulness strategies learned in elementary school once they continue into junior high school? Would implementation of daily mindfulness activities be beneficial for all students, not just the students with a diagnosis? For example, the dependent variable could look at academics, focusing, self-esteem, and confidence. Since the data supported my hypothesis, could we generalize? Would we see the same results if these activities were implemented in other classes in our school, specifically for diagnosed students in a regular class setting? And you could even go beyond that and look outside of our school at other classes in other schools in the same area. Here is a list of references that I used for my project. And that concludes my action research study for class ECU 501.